I still remember the taste of that morning. Cold coffee, toast burned along the edge, a breakfast I ate standing up in a rented room on Elm Street in Asheville, North Carolina. $340 a month for four walls, a window that would not close all the way, and a radiator that hissed like it had secrets. I was 24 years old that December. I had two pairs of jeans, one good sweater, and a name almost nobody ever said out loud. Ren Callahan. That was me. And on that Tuesday at 7:22 in the morning, my phone rang, and a man I had never met told me the father I had never really known was dead. My name is Ren, and this is the story of a cabin nobody wanted. A cabin my two half-brothers laughed at when they heard it was mine. A cabin that turned out to be hiding something worth more than every dollar they walked away with. If you have ever felt forgotten by the people who were supposed to love you, stay with me, because what I found under that cabin's floor did not just change my life. It gave me one. I want to start with what you need to know about me. I grew up in a place called St. Agnes Home for Children. It sat on a slow curve of road just outside Asheville, a two-story brick building with white trim and a porch that sagged where the third step used to be. The nuns were not cruel. They were not warm either. They were tired. That is the honest word. Tired women doing tired work for tired little souls who kept arriving faster than they could leave. I got there when I was almost 5 years old. I do not remember the day. I remember bits and pieces, a woman's coat that smelled like cigarettes and rain, a paper cup of apple juice, the sound of my own shoes on a tile floor that seemed to stretch on forever. Sister Bernadette holding my hand saying, "You are safe now, honey? You are safe?" I did not know what safe meant. My mother, they told me later, had died when I was almost 5. A long illness is how they put it, the kind that eats a person from the inside out while everyone around them pretends not to see. She hung on longer than the doctor said she would. She hung on because of me. That is what Sister Bernadette told me years later when I was old enough to ask. She hung on for you, honey, right up until the day her body would not let her hang on anymore. Her name was Aisling. She had red hair and green eyes, and she used to hum old Irish songs to me when she brushed my hair. That is what I was told. I do not remember her face. I remember her hands, small hands, warm hands, and the humming. My father, Cormac Callahan, was alive. Very alive. He had a big house on a lake near Charlotte. He had 2 other sons already older than me. He had a new wife named Vivienne, tall and elegant, with a smile that never quite reached her eyes. Nobody had to tell me that last part. I figured it out on my own. Because in 19 years, my father visited me exactly 4 times. 4. I counted every one. The first time I was 7. He brought a stuffed rabbit. He stayed for 40 minutes. He kept looking at his watch. The second time I was 10. He brought a small locket with a picture of my mother inside. I held it in my fist for 3 days before I lost it. I cried myself sick. The third time I was 13. He did not bring anything. He just sat with me on the porch and asked me what my favorite subject was. I said English. He nodded like it mattered to him, then he left. The fourth time I was 16. He came in through the front door, and the security guard, a big man named Wallace, stopped him before he made it to the front desk. There was some kind of paperwork problem, a restraining order request. I did not understand the words then. I just saw my father's face crumple, saw him look up over Wallace's shoulder, and see me at the top of the stairs. He raised one hand. I raised mine back. That was the last time I ever saw him alive. I want you to remember that hand, that raised hand from an old man at a doorway, looking up at a girl he was not allowed to reach, because that hand is where this story really starts. I aged out of St. Agnes at 18. They gave me a duffel bag, a bus ticket, and a Bible. Sister Bernadette hugged me at the door and cried into my hair. I did not cry. I was too scared to cry. 6 years later, I was still in Asheville. I was working as a waitress at a place called Delphine's Kitchen, a little diner 2 blocks off Merriman Avenue, red vinyl booths, a jukebox that only played country music from before 1970. Delphine herself, 65 years old, gray braid down her back hands like a grandmother should have. She was the closest thing to family I had. She was the one sitting across from me the morning my phone rang. She was pouring me coffee and telling me the special was chicken and waffles. And when I answered the phone and the voice on the other end said, "Miss Callahan, I am sorry to tell you that your father Cormac Callahan passed away last night," Delphine set the coffee pot down so slowly that not a drop spilled. She reached across the table. She put her hand on mine. I hung up. I looked at her, and I said the strangest thing. I said he raised his hand. She did not ask what I meant. She just nodded, like she understood. That was Delphine. The reading of the will was 3 days later, in Charlotte, in a lawyer's office on the 22nd floor of a glass building that made my ears pop in the elevator. I wore a black dress I had bought at a thrift store for $11. I wore shoes that pinched. I sat in a chair against the wall the way you sit in a doctor's office when you do not want anyone to look at you. 2 men and 1 woman came in together. My half-brothers. My stepmother. Sullivan Callahan was 35. Real estate big deals, a face like a magazine ad. He wore a gray suit that probably cost more than my rent for 6 months. He looked at me once when he walked in. His eyes moved over me the way you look at a chair. He did not say hello. Emmett Callahan was 32. Softer around the edges, quieter. He managed some kind of investment fund. He carried himself like a man who was always waiting for permission. He nodded at me, just barely. Then he sat down and stared at his hands. Vivian came in last. 58 years old, silver hair swept up a black cashmere coat pearl earrings. She looked at me for exactly 1 second. Then she looked away as if I had never been there at all. The lawyer's name was Mr. Henshaw. He was in his 70s, thin as a rake with reading glasses hanging from a chain around his neck. He cleared his throat and began reading. The house on Lake Norman went to Sullivan. 6,000 square feet. Private dock. Boat included. The cattle ranch outside Statesville went to Emmett. 240 acres. The investment portfolio valued at $3.5 million was divided between the two of them. The antique car collection, the art, the wine cellar, on and on. Sullivan smiled. Not a real smile. The kind you practice in a mirror? Emmett did not smile. He looked pale. Vivian sat very still, her hands folded in her lap, her chin lifted. And then Mr. Henshaw looked up at me. "There is one final property," he said. "A cabin. 12 acres, located in Cedar Hollow in the Blue Ridge Mountains of North Carolina. This is left to Miss Wren Callahan." The room went quiet. Then Sullivan laughed. It was not a big laugh. It was small, cruel, like he had been saving it up. "Well," he said, still smiling, "at least Dad finally found something worthless enough to give her." Emmett flinched. Vivian allowed herself the smallest curl of her lip. Not a smile, not quite, but something close. Nobody looked at me. I sat in my thrift store dress and my pinched shoes, and I did what I had learned to do a long time ago in a home full of forgotten children. I said nothing. I looked down at my hands, and I waited for it to be over. When the papers were signed and the family had left when I was gathering my coat and turning to go, Mr. Henshaw touched my elbow. He was a very old man. His hand was light as a leaf. "Miss Callahan," he said quietly, "your father asked me to give you this, in private, not in front of them." He slid a small envelope into my hand. "He was very specific," he said. "You alone." I opened it in the elevator. Inside was a small brass key worn smooth at the edges, and a slip of paper. His handwriting, careful, slow, as if the pen had been heavy. "Find Silas in Cedar Hollow. He has been waiting for you for 19 years. Keep the fire burning. Dad." I read it 3 times before the elevator reached the ground floor. Then I sat down on a bench in the marble lobby of that glass building and I cried like a child. Not for the money I had not gotten, not for the house on the lake, not for any of it. I cried because a dead man had called himself Dad, and nobody in 24 years had ever called me waiting for. The drive up into the Blue Ridge Mountains took most of a day. I had a 1999 Honda Civic with 160,000 miles on it, a heater that only worked on the highest setting, and a passenger seat covered in a folder full of paperwork. Deeds, property records, a little map Mr. Henshaw had printed out for me with a red star drawn in ballpoint pen. Cedar Hollow. Population 412. I left Asheville at 9 in the morning. By noon, the snow had started. By 3 o'clock, the world had turned white. The road narrowed. The trees leaned close. My radio faded into static and then into silence. My phone lost signal somewhere past a wooden sign that said, "Now entering Yancey County." I remember the smell of that drive. Wet wool, old vinyl, the cardboard cup of gas station coffee that had gone cold 2 hours before. The faint smell of pine coming in through a crack in the window I did not have the sense to close. And the quiet. I had never known quiet like that. I grew up in a building with 84 other children. I lived in an apartment above a laundromat. I worked in a diner where the fryer never stopped. Silence was a stranger to me. But that silence, that Blue Ridge silence, it did not feel empty. It felt full of something, full of listening. I passed the sign a little before dusk. Welcome to Cedar Hollow. Population 412. Elevation 3,142 feet. The town was one street long. A white Baptist church with a steeple that leaned slightly east, a feed store with a wooden porch, a diner with a red neon sign that said Delphine Cedar Hollow, and I laughed out loud in my car because, of course, everywhere I went there was a Delphine. And at the far end of Main Street, a general store with a hand-painted sign above the door that read, Hartwell's Provisions, since 1953. I parked out front. A little brass bell tinkled when I pushed the door open. Warm air wrapped around me. Wood smoke, coffee, fresh bread. The smell of a place where somebody actually lived. Behind the counter sat an old man reading a newspaper. 72 maybe, white hair, deep-set eyes, big hands folded over the paper, a red flannel shirt. He looked up. He looked at me. And then, without a word, he took off his reading glasses. He set them down on the counter. He stood up slowly like a man who had been waiting a long time to stand. "You have your mother's eyes," he said. I could not breathe for a moment. Nobody had ever told me that. Nobody. Not once in my entire life. I stood there in my wet coat, snow melting off my boots onto his clean floor, and I opened my mouth and closed it and opened it again. "You are Silas," I finally said. He nodded once. "And you," he said, "are Cormac Callahan's daughter. And he told me you would come. He told me a long time ago. I stayed in that store for 2 hours. Silas made me coffee. Real coffee from a percolator that had been on the same shelf, he said, since Eisenhower was president. He put a plate of shortbread in front of me. He sat down across from me at a small wooden table by the window, and outside the snow kept falling, and inside a wood stove crackled in the corner. And he told me things. He told me my father came to Cedar Hollow once a month, every month, for 19 years. He told me my father brought groceries to the Miller family the winter Bill Miller lost his job at the sawmill. He paid quietly through a third party so the Millers never knew. He told me my father fixed Reverend Ellis's roof after the ice storm of 2011, just showed up one Saturday with a ladder and a truckload of shingles and did not leave until it was done. He told me my father sat with old Mrs. Henderson the night her husband died, held her hand, made her tea, slept in the chair beside her until morning. None of this sounded like the man Sullivan and Emmett had described at the will reading. The man whose name they said with such polite emptiness. The man they had let the strangers of Cedar Hollow know better than his own daughter did. I asked Silas why he came, why every month. Silas looked down into his coffee for a long moment. Then he said, "That is not mine to tell Honey. That is for you to find out. But I will tell you this. Whatever you are about to find in that cabin, it was never meant to punish you. It was meant to bring you home." I did not know what to do with that. I still do not sometimes. When I got up to leave, Silas pressed a folded paper map into my hand. He had drawn the route himself in a shaky blue ballpoint pen. "One more thing," he said. He hesitated. "There is a woman you should meet. Not tonight. Tonight you need rest. But soon. Her name is Odette Briggs. She lives about 2 miles up the ridge from your cabin. Retired nurse." He paused. "She was the last person to see your father alive." I felt the floor tilt under me. "The lawyer said he died at his house," I said. "In Charlotte. Heart attack. In his sleep." Silas met my eyes, and what I saw in that old man's face was not confusion. It was something else. It was pity. It was the look you give someone who is about to find out that everything they have been told is a lie. "You go on up to the cabin, honey," he said gently. "Keep the fire burning. You will understand soon enough." Before we go on, I want to stop for just a moment. Because if you are still with me, if you have been listening this far, I want you to know something. This next part of the story is where everything changed for me. And I think it might be the part that stays with you too. So, if you have ever felt like the person on the outside of your own family, like the one who was not invited, like the child who was overlooked, would you do something for me? Would you leave a little heart in the comments so I know you are here? And if you believe like I do that love has a way of finding people even when the world tries to keep them apart, then please take 1 second and hit that subscribe button. That is all it takes. One little tap. And you will get to hear more stories like this. One stories about second chances and open doors and grandmother's kitchens and the quiet kindness of small American towns. All right, come back with me. Come back to Cedar Hollow. Because Ren is about to see the cabin for the very first time. The road up to the cabin was not really a road, it was two ruts in the earth with a strip of frozen grass down the middle. My Honda was not built for it. I crawled up in first gear, the snow up to my hubcaps, the headlights bouncing off tree trunks and shadows, and the occasional pair of yellow deer eyes staring back at me from between the pines. I passed a mailbox, rusted, leaning. The name on the side faded almost to nothing, said Callahan. I stopped the car. I sat there in the dark with the engine running. Callahan, my name, on a mailbox, waiting for me my whole life. I pulled up in front of the cabin just as the last light left the sky. It stood in a small clearing framed by ancient pines heavy with snow. 2 stories, log construction, a steep tin roof that had gone the color of old pennies, a porch that ran the length of the front sagging on one end propped up on 2 cinder blocks, windows dark, chimney silent. It looked like 100 abandoned cabins in 100 old photographs, but it also looked somehow like it was breathing. I got out. My boots crunched into snow that came up past my ankles. My breath made white clouds. Somewhere behind the cabin, a screech owl called and something small ran through the underbrush. I walked up the porch steps. The wood groaned under my weight the way old wood does when it has not been walked on in a long time. But there was something else too. A print, a partial boot print in the light dusting of snow on the top step. Fresh, maybe a day old. Somebody had been here recently. I told myself it was probably a hunter, or a neighbor checking on the place. I told myself not to be afraid. I unlocked the door with the brass key. It stuck at first, then something inside gave, and the door swung slowly open on hinges that had been oiled recently. Not rusty, not stiff, oiled. I stepped inside, and I stopped. The cabin smelled like cedar wood and old paper and something else, something clean, like somebody had swept the floor not too long ago. I found the light switch by feel. A single yellow bulb overhead flickered on. The main room was small, a stone fireplace against the far wall, a leather armchair beside it cracked with age but still whole, a rag rug on the floor, a wooden coffee table with 3 water rings burned into the top, bookshelves floor to ceiling on both sides of the fireplace packed with old volumes, their spines soft from being read. The kitchen was through an arch to the left, a cast iron stove, a porcelain sink, a wooden table with 2 chairs, a single cup on the drain board upside down as if somebody had washed it and set it there to dry. A single cup. I set my bag down. I walked slowly through the room. Every step made the old floorboards creak. There was a photograph on the mantel above the fireplace. I picked it up. The frame was wooden hand-carved. The glass was dusty but not filthy. Inside was a photograph of my father, 10 years younger, maybe standing on this same front porch. He was smiling. Beside him stood an old woman I did not know. She was small and round, with white hair in a bun and a shawl around her shoulders. She was laughing at something, one hand raised as if to swat my father's arm. They looked like family, not by blood necessarily, but by choice. I turned the frame over. On the back of the photograph in my father's careful handwriting were 4 words in faded ink. Keep the fire burning. My hand shook. I set the frame back on the mantel, carefully, like it might break. Then I noticed the firewood. It was stacked neatly in a copper bin next to the hearth. Split oak, bark still fresh. The paper kindling folded like little tents on top. Ready, waiting. I knelt down. I built a small fire. I struck a match. The flame caught fast, and within a minute the room was full of the sound of crackling wood and the smell of wood smoke. I sat down in the leather armchair. I watched the fire. And for the first time in my entire life, I was in a place that had my name on the mailbox out front. I was almost asleep when I heard the knock. 3 soft raps, then silence. I sat up straight. My heart hammered against my ribs. I looked at the window. It was full dark outside, not a single light anywhere for miles. The knock came again. 3 soft raps. I got up. I walked to the door. I put my hand on the knob, and I said, my voice smaller than I wanted it to be, "Who is there?" A woman's voice answered from the other side, warm, a little tired. "My name is Odette Briggs, honey. I live up the ridge. I saw your smoke." I opened the door. She was 68 years old, though I did not know it then. She stood 5'0" in her heavy boots, silver hair pulled back in a low knot, a red wool coat, a wicker basket over one arm, and I could smell what was in that basket before I saw it. Warm bread, butter, a casserole still steaming under a checked cloth. She looked at me with eyes the color of a winter creek. And then without asking, without waiting to be invited, without one word of formality, she reached up and cupped my face in her hand. "Oh, sweet girl," she said softly. "You have his eyes." And that is when I started to cry. Not the polite kind of crying either. The kind that comes up from some place you did not know you kept things. Because a stranger at my door on a winter night had just given me a mother and a father in one single sentence. And in 24 years of my life, no one had ever done that. I let Odette in. She did not act like a guest. She set the basket on the kitchen table. She put the casserole in the oven to keep it warm. She pulled a checked tablecloth out of her basket and laid it over the wooden table like she had done it 100 times before, because I would learn she had. She sat me down at the table. She put a mug of hot cider in my hands. She sat across from me, and she looked at me for a long moment the way a grandmother looks at a grandchild she has not seen in far too long. "Your daddy told me you might come one day," she said. "He did not know when. He hoped for it. He talked about you like you were the sun." I could not speak. She reached across the table. She took my hand. Her hand was warm, warmer than seemed possible for such an old woman. "Honey," she said, "I need to tell you something. And I do not know if this is going to make things harder for you or easier, but you have a right to know." She took a breath. "Your father did not die in Charlotte." The mug slipped in my fingers. I set it down before I spilled it. "He died right here," Odette said. Her eyes never left mine. "In this cabin, in this chair, on the 15th of last month, I was with him." I stared at her. "But the lawyer said," I whispered, "the lawyer said heart attack, in his sleep, at the house." Odette nodded slowly. "That is what your stepmother wanted said. That is what she paid to have said." The room got very quiet. The fire popped. Somewhere upstairs, a floorboard settled. Odette squeezed my hand. "He came up here every month, Ren. Sometimes for a weekend, sometimes just for a day. This last time, he told me he was not feeling right. He had been having chest pains for a week, but he wanted to come up. He said it was important. He said he needed to check on something." She looked toward the fireplace. "He fell asleep in that chair, right where you were sitting, and he did not wake up." I put my face in my hands. I do not know how long I sat like that. When I looked up, Odette was still there, still holding my hand. "I called your stepmother from town. I had to drive down to Silas's store to get a signal. She came the next day, alone. She brought a private ambulance and a doctor she paid. They took him. She told everyone he had died in his bed in Charlotte." "Why?" I whispered. Odette's mouth thinned. "Because your stepmother spent 19 years pretending Cedar Hollow did not exist, and she was not about to let a death certificate say otherwise. Odette stayed the night. She would not let me be alone. She made up the couch with quilts from a chest at the foot of it, quilts that smelled like cedar chips and lavender sachets, quilts that somebody had washed and folded and put away for the next person who would need them. She kissed the top of my head like I was 6 years old. She said, 'Tomorrow you and I are going to look at something under this floor.' And she went to sleep in the leather armchair by the fire. I lay awake until dawn, listening to the wind, listening to the woods, listening to a house that felt for the first time I could remember like it was listening back. In the morning, Odette made coffee on the wood stove and fried 2 eggs in a black iron pan. She fed me, she fed herself, she washed the dishes, then she wiped her hands on her apron and sat down across from me at the little kitchen table. "Ren," she said, "your daddy told me one thing. Just one. He said if you ever came, and if I was still alive when you did, I was to show you where to start. Nothing more. Not what was there, not why, just where to look." She reached across and squeezed my hand. "Bring me a flashlight, honey." I found one in the drawer beside the sink, a big yellow one, batteries fresh. She led me into the kitchen. She got down on her knees on the wooden floor. Her old bones creaked as she did it. She pointed at a section of floorboards near the far corner. "See that one?" I knelt beside her. One board sat just slightly higher than the others. Just barely. You would not notice it unless somebody told you. She brushed her hand across it, sweeping dust away. There, set into the wood, almost invisible under 19 years of grime, was a small iron ring. I stared. Pull it, she said gently. I looked at her. Go on. I hooked my fingers under the iron ring. It was cold. I pulled. The board came up with a long, low groan below a square opening, and a narrow wooden staircase going down into the dark. Cold air rose from below. Damp stone, old paper, the smell of a place that had been closed for a long time. Odette handed me the flashlight. She told me quietly, that when you found this, I was to go home, because whatever was down there, he wanted you to find it alone. She stood up. She kissed the top of my head again. She said, I will come back tomorrow. Take your time down there, honey. Take all the time you need. And she went. I sat on the kitchen floor for a long time before I could make myself go down. Then I did. I shone the flashlight ahead of me, one step, then another, then another. At the bottom, I straightened up. I swept the beam around. I was in a small stone room, maybe 10 feet by 12. The walls were rough gray stone mortared by hand. The ceiling was low. The air was cold dry still, and the walls were lined with shelves. Every single shelf, floor to ceiling, packed with journals. Leather journals, cloth journals, notebook after notebook, folders, file boxes, envelopes bundled with faded blue ribbons, 19 years of a man's private life, waiting for me. Against the far wall stood a wooden desk, and on that desk alone in the center sat one journal, leather-bound, cracked at the spine, placed there deliberately, as if he had put it there the last morning he was alive. I walked to the desk. My boots made no sound on the stone floor. I sat down in the wooden chair. I opened the front cover. The first page had one line on it, my father's handwriting. Careful, slow, as if the pen had been heavy. If you are reading this, Ren, you have found what I spent my life protecting. I turned the page. I know I failed you in ways I can never repair, but I need you to know something. I never stopped loving you. Not for one day, not for 1 hour, not for 1 minute. I fought for you. I fought harder than you will ever know. You will find the proof of that fight in this room. Read it in whatever order you like. Take your time. There is no rush. This place is yours now. It has been yours from the day you were born. Keep the fire burning, sweet girl. Your dad. I put my head down on the desk, and I wept. I wept for the little girl in the cafeteria of St. Agnes who saved her Christmas orange because it was the only thing that felt like a gift. I wept for the girl at 7 who held a stuffed rabbit for a year and never let anyone take it until Sister Bernadette washed it in bleach by accident and the fur fell out. I wept for the girl at 16 who watched a man raise his hand to her from a doorway he was not allowed to walk through. I wept for 24 years of thinking I had been forgotten. Because down in that little stone room in a cabin in the Blue Ridge Mountains of North Carolina, I had just found out that I had been the most remembered girl in the world. I spent 3 days in that room. I came up only for coffee and for sleep. Odette brought me food. She left it on the porch. She knew without being told that I could not talk to anyone yet. I read. I read journals dated the year I was 5. Drove past the orphanage today, saw her in the yard with a red coat on. She was chasing another little girl and laughing. I sat in the car and cried for an hour. I read journals dated the year I was 10, sent the locket. It has her mother's picture in it. Vivian said it was inappropriate. I sent it anyway. I paid the sister who runs the mailroom $50 to put it in Ren's hand herself. I hope it made her happy for 1 hour. I read journals dated the year I was 15. She won the 9th grade essay contest. I read about it in the county paper. The essay was about her mother. I framed the newspaper clipping. I keep it on the desk. Every writer needs a champion. I hope somewhere she knows she has one. I read journals dated 4 months before he died. The doctor says my heart is in bad shape. I have started making arrangements. If I do not have time to fix what I have broken, I have to at least leave her the map. I close my eyes. I sat in the cold stone room surrounded by 19 years of a father's love, and I understood something for the first time in my life. He had not forgotten me. He had been forbidden. There is a difference. And that difference broke something inside me. Not something bad. Something old and hard and cold. It broke and something new came out of it, warm and green and alive. I do not have a better word for it than this. He had loved me. He had loved me the whole time. On the 3rd afternoon, I found the box. It was in a cabinet against the far wall. The cabinet was locked. It took me an hour to find the little key hidden in a tin marked personal on the second shelf up. Inside the cabinet was one wooden box. Nothing else. Just the box. It was about the size of a small bread box. Dark oak, hand-carved, and carved into the lid in careful script were two words: Ren Callahan. I lifted it out with both hands. I sat down at the desk. I opened it. Inside were letters, bundle after bundle of letters, tied with faded blue ribbon. Dozens. No, more. Way more. The oldest one was dated the year I turned 5. I picked it up. My hand shook. I unfolded the paper. Dear Ren, today is your 5th birthday. I sent a doll. I hope she got it to you. She is a rag doll with red hair like your mother. Her name is Molly unless you want to name her something else. You can name her anything you want. I love you, sweet girl. I love you so much. Dad. I never got a doll named Molly. I never got any doll. I picked up the next letter and the next and the next. Every birthday, every Christmas, every Easter, every first day of school, every essay contest, and every graduation, and every quiet Tuesday in between when he had missed me too much not to write it down. I picked one at random, an envelope halfway down the second stack. Dated the fall I was 11. Dear Ren. Today I saw a red-haired girl walking home from the middle school on Merriman Avenue. She was carrying a green backpack and singing to herself. For 1 second I thought it was you. It was not you. But my chest hurt for 2 hours after. I hope wherever you are today, you are singing. Your mother sang. She had the sweetest voice in 3 counties. If you got her voice, sweet girl, do not waste it. Sing loud. Sing where people can hear you. I love you. Dad. I set the letter down. I did sing at 11. I sang in the church choir at St. Agnes every Sunday. Sister Bernadette said I had my mother's voice, though of course she had never heard my mother. She said it because she knew a little girl needed to be told she came from someplace. I picked up another letter, dated the December I was 16. Dear Ren, they would not let me in today. I drove 3 hours in the rain to see you for your birthday. I got as far as the reception desk. There was a paper on the desk. There is always a paper on the desk. I saw you at the top of the stairs. You raised your hand at me. I will remember that hand for the rest of my life. Whatever the papers say, whatever the courts say, you raised your hand. And that means somewhere in you, you knew me. I love you. God, I love you. Dad. I put the letter down and I put my forehead down on the wooden desk. And I did not lift my head for a long time because he had seen the hand. He had seen it too. 147 letters. I counted them. 147. And on the back of every single envelope stamped in blurry red ink were the words, Return to sender. Refused. And under that stamp, in another handwriting entirely sharp and elegant and cold, one word, refused. Written in the hand of Vivian Callahan. Every single one. I sat there on the stone floor, surrounded by 20 years of love that had never been allowed to reach me, and I did not cry. I had cried myself dry. I sat there, and I felt something I had never felt in my life. I felt angry. At the bottom of the box, under all the letters, I found a folder, sealed, manila, marked legal private. I opened it. Court documents. Petition for visitation, Yancey County Family Court, filed October 2003, denied. Petition for visitation, Buncombe County Family Court, filed February 2008, denied. Petition for visitation, Mecklenburg County Family Court, filed August 2013, denied. 3 petitions across 10 years when I was between 4 and 14 years old. Everyone filed by my father, everyone denied. Attached to each was a sworn affidavit, signed by Vivian Callahan. The affidavit said in careful legal language that Cormac Callahan was a chronic alcoholic, that he was mentally unstable, that contact with the child would put her in danger. Every word of it was a lie. Every single word. I sat on that cold stone floor with a court order in my hand, and I understood everything. My father had spent 19 years trying to reach me, and my stepmother had spent 19 years stopping him. I want to pause the story here, just for a moment. Because if you have been listening this whole way, I need you to know something. This is the part where I had to put the letters down and sit on that floor and just breathe. And I think if you have ever loved somebody and been kept from them, or if you have ever been kept from somebody who loved you and you did not even know it, you understand what I mean. If this story is finding you tonight, if it is meeting something in your own heart, Would you share it with someone who might need it? A daughter, a sister, a friend, the lady at church whose eyes look tired. And please, if you have not yet subscribed to this channel, we tell stories about family, real family, the kind you were born to and the kind you build with your own two hands. That is what this whole channel is about. Coming home. Come back with me now. Because Ren is about to meet the man who has been waiting to help her fight. I climbed out of that stone room in the morning. I sat on the porch of the cabin in the cold sunshine. Odette came at 9 o'clock. She did not ask what I had found. She just sat down beside me on the porch steps and waited. After a long time, I said, "There is a lawyer in town. Silas mentioned him once. August Pratt." Odette nodded. "August was your daddy's oldest friend up here. Went to school together as boys. He will want to see you." I said, "Then let us go see him." August Pratt was 58 years old, tall, and stooped with a full beard going gray and a plaid coat that looked older than I was. His office was a converted living room in a little frame house on the corner of Main and Locust in Cedar Hollow. He had one secretary, a woman named Ruby, who was 73 and had a Yorkshire Terrier under the desk. When I walked in, with the folder of letters and court documents under my arm, August took one look at me and said, "Oh, honey, there you are." He stood up. He came around the desk. He took the folder from my hand as gently as if it were a live bird. "Come sit down," he said. "There is so much I have to tell you." We sat in his little office for 4 hours. He made tea on a hot plate in the corner. Ruby brought us shortbread on a chipped plate. The Yorkshire Terrier, whose name was Dolly, curled up on my feet, and I did not move for the whole 4 hours because I did not want to disturb her. August told me things nobody else had ever known. He told me that my father had come to see him 7 years ago, sat in that same chair I was sitting in, and said, "August, I want to set up a trust for my daughter. I want to do it in a way that Vivienne cannot touch it. I want it to go to her the day she turns 25, not a day sooner. And I want it hidden, buried, because if my wife finds it, she will do everything in her power to destroy it." August had done it. He had set up a trust in the name of the Cedar Hollow Preservation Trust. It looked on paper like a small nonprofit dedicated to protecting historic buildings in the mountain community. It had bylaws, it had a board, it had a bank account. The current balance of that trust as of the previous week was $1,242,000. And on my 25th birthday, which was 6 weeks away, the entire balance was scheduled to transfer to me. I stared at him. "That is impossible," I said. August shook his head. "That is the exact opposite of impossible. That is your daddy protecting you the only way he knew how." He leaned forward. "But Ren, honey, I have to tell you something that concerns me." He was quiet for a moment. "Sullivan came to see me last week." I sat up. "He said he was doing due diligence on his father's estate. He wanted to know about a certain nonprofit registered to a Cedar Hollow address. He asked pointed questions. He is suspicious." "Can he touch it?" I asked. August was quiet for a moment. "If the transfer to you goes through on your birthday and it is properly documented, then no, he cannot touch it. But there is a clause in the trust. If the beneficiary, meaning you, is not present at a formal signing on the day of transfer, the funds default to a contingent beneficiary." "Who?" I asked, though I already knew. "Vivienne," he said quietly. I closed my eyes. August covered my hand with his. "She... 6 weeks, Ren," he said. "We just have to get you to your birthday, and then this money is yours, and so is your father's memory. And nobody, not Vivienne, not Sullivan, not anybody can ever take that from you again." 3 days later, Sullivan came to the cabin. I was on the porch splitting kindling with a hatchet Odette had brought me. She had said, "A cabin without kindling is a cold cabin, honey, and you are going to learn to swing that hatchet like you mean it." The black Range Rover came slowly up the ruts. I straightened. I set the hatchet down on the porch railing. Sullivan got out. He wore a long charcoal coat, Italian shoes that were not made for mountain roads. His breath made clouds in the cold air. He looked at me. He looked at the cabin. "So, this is where the old man kept coming?" he said. I said nothing. He climbed the porch steps. He did not ask permission. He just walked past me into my house. I followed him. He stood in the main room. He looked around slowly. His eyes moved over the fireplace, the leather chair, the bookshelves. They lingered on the photograph on the mantel. He picked it up. He looked at it. He set it back down. Ren, he said, I am going to make you an offer because at the end of the day, we are family, and family should take care of each other. I said nothing. $40,000 cash for this cabin today. I will wire it before you go to bed tonight. No, thank you, I said. He looked at me, really looked at me. For the first time in my entire life, I think he really looked at me. His face changed. The polite mask came off. And what was underneath it, I want to tell you honestly, was a man who was afraid. Ren, he said, and his voice was lower, tighter. You do not understand what you are stepping into. My mother spent 19 years keeping this family in one piece, keeping our name clean, keeping our father's mistakes out of the papers. Do not undo all of that now. Please, for everyone's sake, take the money, sell me the cabin, go home. This is my home, I said quietly. He stared at me for a long moment. Then he shook his head. He walked out. He did not close the door behind him. I stood in the middle of my father's cabin, watching the Range Rover disappear down the ruts, and I felt something cold settle in my chest. That night, the kitchen window rattled. I woke up. I sat up in the leather chair by the fire, my heart pounding. I heard it again. A soft tap, a scrape. I got up. I picked up the hatchet from where I had left it by the door. I went to the kitchen. There at the window, I saw it. Somebody had tried to pry it open. The wooden frame was gouged. The lock had held. Boot prints in the snow outside. Big ones. Nobody was there anymore. But somebody had been. I did not call the sheriff. Something told me not to. I sat down at the kitchen table with the hatchet across my lap, and I watched the sun come up. The next morning they came. Silas, Odette, August Pratt with his old plaid coat, Delphine Cole, who had heard I was staying at the cabin and had baked a peach cobbler and drove it up in her old truck, Reverend Ellis in his black overcoat and his kind gray eyes. They filled my kitchen, they ate the cobbler, they drank the coffee, and they told me stories. Story after story about my father. The winter he shoveled Widow Hensley's driveway every morning for a month because her son was overseas and could not be there. The autumn he paid off the vet bill for the McCallum family whose old golden retriever had cancer. The summer he taught 3 of the town's boys to fish because their own daddies were working 2 jobs and could not. The Christmas he showed up at the church with a whole trunk full of wrapped toys, and when Reverend Ellis asked who they were from, he just said, "Say they are from a friend, and keep my name out of it." He had done this for 19 years. And nobody, not one single person in his other life, had ever known. At the end, Delphine set a photo album on the kitchen table. "I have to give you this," she said. "He asked me to keep it in case anything ever happened to him. He said it belonged to you." I opened it. The first photograph on the very first page was of my father. He was sitting in this very kitchen, in this very chair, holding a baby on his lap. The baby was about a year old. Red hair, green eyes, fat little hands reaching up for his beard. Under the photograph in his handwriting one line. Ren, 14 months, Cedar Hollow, April. I could not speak. Delphine put her hand over mine. "Vivian went to Paris for a week that spring," she said quietly. "Your daddy drove down to Charleston. He got you. He brought you here. For 7 days. He never told anybody. Nobody outside this room ever knew. But you were here. You slept in that back bedroom upstairs. You learned to walk on that porch. Reverend Ellis baptized you in the church quiet off the books because your daddy wanted you blessed at least once by somebody who loved you." I looked at the picture. At the baby with red hair. At the man holding her like she was the whole world. I had been here. I had been held. I had been loved out loud and in daylight in front of an entire mountain town when I was too small to remember. But my body remembered. Because when I had walked into this cabin 4 nights before, part of me had known. Part of me had come home. That is where the second part of my story ends. I want to tell you what happens next. I want to tell you about the fight I was about to walk into, and about the brother I did not know I had, and about the little girl who was about to knock on my front door on a cold Tuesday afternoon. But first, please, if you are still with me, do one thing. Tell me in the comments, do you have a home, a real one? Not just walls. A place that knows your name. I want to hear. And if this story has made you feel any less alone tonight, subscribe. It is free. It costs you nothing, and it means the world to us. All right, come back to Cedar Hollow, come back to the door, because someone is about to knock. She came on a Tuesday, late afternoon. The light was low and pink over the ridges. I was outside splitting wood the way Odette had taught me. I had the hang of it now. 2 strokes, sometimes 1. My hands were rough. My back was strong. I had changed in ways I had not noticed until I caught my reflection in the kitchen window one morning and thought, who is that woman I heard footsteps in the snow? I looked up. She came around the bend of my drive. A girl, skinny as a whip, wearing a coat that was too thin and a backpack that was falling apart. Her boots were soaked through. Her nose was red. She stopped when she saw me. She stood there, trying to be brave. "Ma'am," she said. Her voice shook. I was told down at Hartwell's Provisions that this might be a place a person could rest. Just for the night. I have some money. Not much, but I can pay. I do not want to be trouble. I set the axe down. "How old are you, honey?" I said. 17. "What is your name?" Marin Reeves." I looked at her. She looked at me. And I saw myself at 12 years old sitting alone in a cafeteria in Asheville saving my orange because it was the only thing that felt like a gift. I opened the front door of my cabin. I said, "Come inside, Marin. There is soup on the stove and there is a bed upstairs. You do not need to pay for anything." I closed the door behind her. And I would not, in all my life, ever open my door to a cold traveler and turn her away. That was the day it started. Marin's story came out slowly over the course of the evening. There had been a fire 2 weeks earlier in a little trailer park outside a town called Spruce Pine. Her mother had died 3 years ago. Her aunt in Tennessee was her only remaining family, but the aunt was in the hospital with pneumonia and could not take Marin for another month. Marin had been staying with a neighbor, but the fire had taken everything, and now Marin was traveling to another distant cousin in West Virginia to wait it out. She was doing it alone, on a Greyhound bus, with $84 in her backpack. She had gotten off the bus in Cedar Hollow to warm up. She had walked into Hartwell's Provisions to buy a cup of coffee she could not quite afford. And Silas, God bless him, had looked at her and said, "Honey, you go on up to the Callahan place. Tell her I sent you." She stayed with me for 3 weeks. The first night, I made up the little bedroom at the top of the stairs, the one with the window that looked out over the pines. I gave her one of my flannel shirts to sleep in because her pajamas had gone up in the fire with everything else. She stood in the doorway of that bedroom holding the flannel shirt against her chest, and she looked at the quilt on the bed the way a person looks at something she thinks might disappear if she blinks. I called her aunt the next morning. Her aunt's name was Louise. She was 61, she was recovering from pneumonia in a hospital outside Knoxville, and when I told her where Marin was, she cried into the phone for a full minute before she could speak. I sent Louise pictures of my cabin. I sent her pictures of Marin at breakfast. I sent her Odette's phone number and August Pratt's phone number and Reverend Ellis's phone number, and I told her, call any of these people any hour, any day, and they will tell you the same thing. She is safe here. She is fed here. She is going to school here as soon as you say the word. Louise said, "I do not know how to thank you." I said, "Ma'am, somebody was supposed to do this for me a long time ago. I am late, but I am doing it now." Marin enrolled at the little regional high school down in Burnsville. Reverend Ellis drove her every morning. Odette taught her to bake. Silas gave her a job stocking shelves on Saturdays for pocket money. She helped me stack firewood. She helped me sweep. She learned to make Odette's biscuits, and she cried the first time she pulled them out of the oven brown and perfect because nobody had ever taught her anything like that before. On her third night with me sitting by my fire, she looked at me with big, serious eyes. "Miss Wren, why are you being so kind to me? You do not even know me." And I said the only true thing I knew. Because a long time ago, somebody was supposed to be kind to me, and they were not allowed to be. And I have decided I am not going to let that be true for anybody else who walks up to my door. She stared into the fire for a while. Then she said quietly, "I hope I get to have a place like this one day." And I said, "Sweetheart, you already do." August Pratt called me on the second Friday. He said, "It is time." We drove to Charlotte in his old Buick. Odette came with us. I had not seen Charlotte in 3 weeks. It looked strange to me, too tall, too loud, too full of people who did not say good morning to strangers. I had a folder on my lap. Inside the folder were 3 things: the court petitions Vivienne had lied on, 20 photocopies of the return letters marked refused in her handwriting, and 1 letter, just 1, from the box. The last letter my father had written to me. He had written it 3 weeks before he died. I had read it 100 times. He said in it that he had failed me. He said in it that he was sorry. He said in it that the greatest regret of his life was not the money he had lost or the deals that had gone bad, but the years he had lost with his daughter. He said in it that he loved me. Twice. In 2 different places. In case I missed it the first time. We pulled up to the house on Lake Norman just as the sun was setting. The house was a mountain of glass and stone. I got out. I walked up the flagstone path in my old boots and my thrift store coat and my father's last letter in my hand. I rang the doorbell. Vivian opened it herself. She was holding a wine glass. Her face went through 3 expressions in 1 second. Surprise, fury, composure. She said, "You do not belong here." I said, "That is funny. I have been thinking that about you for 19 years. She stared at me. I walked past her, into the great room where Sullivan and Emmett and their wives and a few dinner guests were seated around a long table under a chandelier the size of a small car. Every face turned. I set the folder on the table. I said, "Sullivan, Emmett, Vivian, I have some things I need to say." Sullivan stood up. His face was white. "Get out," he said. I did not get out. I opened the folder, I laid the court petitions down, I laid the returned letters down, and on top in front of everyone, I laid my father's last letter to me. Vivian saw the handwriting. Her face changed. I saw it change. I saw the small, quick flicker of a woman who realized she had lost. "You lied under oath, Vivian," I said. 3 times, in 3 counties, about a man who could not defend himself in court because he was too busy trying to see his daughter. You perjured yourself to keep me from my father. The dinner guests were still. A woman with pearls half rose. A man in a blue shirt slowly set down his wine glass. Sullivan said, "Wren, that is enough. You are embarrassing yourself. You are embarrassing all of us." That is when Emmett stood up. Emmett, the quiet brother, the one who had not looked at me at the will reading, the one who managed a fund and lived in a condo and never spoke unless he had to. He stood up so slowly, like his knees had gone stiff. He said, "Mother, it is over." Vivian turned to him. "What did you say?" she said, very softly. Emmett looked at me. His eyes were shining. "Wren," he said, "I have something for you. I have had it for 16 years, and I have been a coward, and I am not being a coward anymore." He walked out of the room. We all stood in silence. I could hear the tick of a clock. Vivian set her wine glass down very carefully on the table. Sullivan's fists were white on the back of his chair. Emmett came back. He was carrying a small metal lockbox. He set it on the table in front of me. He opened it with a little key he had kept on his keychain. Inside were copies, photocopies, notes. "When I was 16, Emmett said, and his voice was ragged, I was cleaning out the attic. Mother was in Europe. I found a box. It had letters in it. From Dad to you." He looked at me. I read them all. I sat on the attic floor, and I read every single one, and I understood what had been done to you. He shook his head. I was too afraid to do anything about it. She was my mother. Sullivan was my brother. Our whole life was built on the lie. So I did the only thing I could do. I photocopied every letter, every court paper, everything. I kept them for years, just in case. He turned to Vivian. "I recorded you, Mother. Do you remember 2 Christmases ago when you told Sullivan that you had made sure the trust would never reach her? I recorded it on my phone. It is on this flash drive." He set a little silver drive on the table. "I have been waiting 16 years to give this to Wren," he said. "I did not know how. I did not know if I ever would. But I am giving it to her tonight." He looked at me. His eyes were full of tears. "I am so sorry, Wren. I am so sorry." Vivian did not scream. She did not slap him. She just closed her eyes. She sat down slowly at her own dining room table, and she closed her eyes, and I saw a woman realize that a 19-year war she had waged in silence had ended in one long evening. Sullivan turned on Emmett with such rage I thought he might strike him. He did not. He shoved him against the wall. He called him a coward. He called him a traitor. He called him worse things. Emmett did not fight back. He just stood there, taking it. I picked up the folder. I picked up the metal box. I picked up the flash drive. I looked at Vivian one more time. I said, "You should have let him love me." I walked out of that house. I walked to August Buick. Odette was waiting for me in the passenger seat, holding a thermos of coffee. I got in the back. August turned the key. We drove into the night. I did not look back. 6 weeks later, on my 25th birthday, at 11 in the morning, in August Pratt's little converted living room office, I signed a stack of papers with a black ballpoint pen. The Cedar Hollow Preservation Trust transferred its full balance to me, $1,242,000. I sat in the chair across from August. Ruby brought me shortbread. Dolly the Yorkshire Terrier lay across my feet. I said, "August, I want to do something with this money." August said, "I thought you might." I said, "I want to keep the house standing. I want to fix the porch and the roof and the barn out back. I want to put in a real furnace and a good water heater and turn the 2 upstairs bedrooms into 4. And I want to buy the little parcel of land behind us if it ever comes up for sale. And I want to make Cedar Hollow a place where anybody who needs somewhere safe to sleep can knock on my door and find a bed." August looked at me for a long time over his reading glasses. Then he said, "Ren Callahan, that is exactly what your father would have wanted." The civil case moved slowly the way civil cases do. Vivienne was sued for the return of the trust funds that had been fraudulently redirected. She was sued for the emotional harm caused by her perjury in family court. She was sued by the estate for concealment and by Emmett quietly for the 16 years of complicity he wished he could take back. She settled, all of it. Rather than face a jury, the house on Lake Norman was sold. So was the cattle ranch. So were most of the paintings and the antique cars and the wine. Sullivan lost his real estate license after a review board found the pattern of financial ties concerning. He moved to Florida. I do not know what he does there now. Vivienne moved to a smaller house. She keeps to herself. I have not seen her since the night at the dinner table. Emmett moved to Cedar Hollow. He rented a room over the feed store. He came up to the cabin the first Saturday after he moved. He stood on the porch. He did not knock. He just stood there with his hands in his pockets, looking at the mailbox with our last name on it. I opened the door. He said, "I do not know how to do this." I said, "Neither do I, but I have coffee." He came inside. We sat at the kitchen table for 2 hours. We did not say much. Sometimes he cried a little. Sometimes I did. Sometimes neither of us did anything but drink coffee and watch the snow fall past the window. When he stood up to leave, he stopped at the door. He said, "I was 10 years old when I first heard Dad crying in his study. It was late. Mom was already in bed. I asked him what was wrong. He said he missed somebody. I asked him who. He said my daughter. And I remember thinking, but I am your son. And then I remember thinking, oh, there is another one." He looked at me. He said, "I am so sorry I was not a brother to you." I said, "Emmett, you can be one now." He came back the next Saturday, and the one after, and the one after that. He got a job at Kyle Robertson's sawmill. He worked on my roof for 6 months until it was tighter than a drum. He did not ask for money. He would not have taken it. He came to Sunday dinner every week. Odette taught him to cook. Marin, who had decided to stay after her aunt got well and had enrolled in the nursing program down at Mars Hill because Odette was mentoring her, called him Uncle Emmett within a month. I called him Emmett. But one Saturday, standing on my porch, I called him brother. He put his head down and cried like a boy. I let him, and then I put my arm around him, because that was what Odette would have done. That was what my father would have done. That was what people who keep the fire burning do. The winter came again. Different this time, different in every way. The cabin was warm now. The furnace hummed low in the basement. The upstairs had 4 proper little bedrooms with quilts on every bed, and Odette had taught Marin to embroider each pillow with a bird, because she said every guest deserved to sleep under something soft that reminded her someone had thought of her. The sign on the mailbox now said, Callahan House. Underneath, in smaller letters, it said, all are welcome. Knock any hour. We had guests all winter. A woman named Ivy, who had left a bad marriage in Knoxville and needed a week to breathe. A boy named Tomas, who had gotten off the wrong bus with no money and no phone. Delphine at the diner called us. We drove down and got him. He stayed 3 days. Then his mother drove up from Georgia and hugged me on my porch until I could not breathe. A family of 4 whose car broke down on the Blue Ridge Parkway. We put them up until the mechanic in town could get the part. The children made snow angels in my yard. An older woman named Corinne, who was driving from Ohio to bury her only sister down in Georgia, and could not face another motel room after 2 days of highway. She stayed one night. She sat at my kitchen table and told me every good thing about her sister until 3 in the morning. When she left the next day, she hugged me at the door and said, "Honey, I did not know how much I needed a kitchen tonight." I said, "I know, ma'am, I know." A young man named Deacon, who had just come home from 4 years in the Marines and could not sleep in a house with his own family yet because everything was too loud. His mother drove him up from Hickory. He stayed for 2 weeks. He did not talk much, but he split every log in my woodpile. He cleaned my gutters, and he sat on the porch with Emmett at night, and slowly, slowly, he started to remember how to be at home in the world. Every guest signed a little book on the mantle, a little journal with a leather cover. On the first page in Odette's careful old handwriting were the words, "Keep the fire burning." By March, there were 70 names in it. By May, 120. On a Sunday afternoon in late March, the last snow of the season was falling. Not heavy, just those big slow flakes that come down like the sky is tired. I was in the kitchen kneading bread. Odette was reading in the leather chair. Marin was upstairs studying for an exam. There was a knock at the door. I wiped my hands. I walked over. I opened it. Sullivan stood on the porch. He was thin, very thin. His coat was too big. There was gray in his hair that had not been there 6 months ago. His eyes were sunken. He did not look like the man in the gray suit from the lawyer's office. He looked like a man who had lost everything he had once thought was his. He looked down at his feet. He said, "Ren, I do not have anywhere else to go." I stood in the doorway. I looked at him for a long moment. I thought about the will reading. I thought about the words. At least Dad finally found something worthless enough to give her. I thought about the Range Rover in my driveway, about the $40,000, about the boot prints in the snow. And I thought about the photograph of my father on the porch of this cabin laughing at something an old woman named Mrs. Henderson was saying. I thought about what he had written on the back. "Keep the fire burning." I stepped aside. I said, "Come in, Sullivan. There is soup on the stove and coffee and a chair by the fire." He looked up at me. He was crying. He walked past me into the kitchen. Odette stood up from the leather chair. She did not smile at him. She was not going to give him that. But she took his coat from him and she hung it on the peg by the door and she said, "Sit down at the table, young man. I will get you a bowl." He sat. I ladled soup. Marin came down the stairs. She stopped when she saw him. She looked at me. I nodded. She sat down across from him. She said, "You look tired." He said, "I am tired." She said, "There is a bed upstairs. You can have it as long as you need it." He put his face in his hands. He wept at my kitchen table like a boy. I set a mug of coffee beside his elbow. I put my hand on his shoulder. I did not say, "I forgive you," not yet. That word is a big word. It needs earning. But I said, "You are home, brother. Whatever else you have lost, you are home." Later that evening, after Sullivan had eaten and slept and eaten again and slept some more, I went out onto the porch. The snow had stopped. The sky had cleared. Every star I had ever heard of was hanging over the ridges above Cedar Hollow. Odette came out. She stood beside me. She was wearing my father's old barn coat because it was warm and it fit her. We did not talk for a long time. Then she said, "You know, honey, I think this is what he always wanted." I said, "I know it is." She said, "You did what he could not finish." I said, "He gave me every tool I needed." She turned and looked at me. Her old face was soft in the porch light. She said, "No, sweet girl, he gave you the cabin, but you made it a home. That was your gift, not his." I turned and looked out at the ridges, at the black outline of the pine trees, at the stars. And I said quietly, mostly to myself, mostly to the man who was not there anymore, "Dad, I finally have a home." And somewhere deep in the trees, an owl called. Once, twice, and I knew. I knew he heard me. Before I go, I want to tell you the one last thing. August Pratt came out to the cabin last week. He is 70 years old now. His beard is all the way white. He still wears the plaid coat. Dolly, the Yorkshire Terrier, has passed on. Ruby retired. But August, he keeps working because he says a man who does not work is a man who forgets who he is. He brought me a letter. He said he had found it in the back of an old file. He said my father had written it 3 weeks before he died and given it to August with instructions to hold it for me until I had built something worth handing it to. August said, "Ren, I think that day has come." I sat on the porch after he left. I opened the letter, my father's handwriting, slower than it had been in the journals, fainter, but still his. "Ren, my sweet girl." I know by the time you read this, I will not be here. And I know that you will have found the cabin and the room below it and the letters, and you will know the truth of what happened between us. I want you to know something. Your brothers are going to take everything they can see: the houses, the accounts, the land, the cars, the things that shine. Let them. Let them have every dollar, every acre, every last thing that can be counted. Because the most valuable thing I ever owned was not any of that. The most valuable thing I ever owned was the promise I made to your mother that if anything ever happened to her, I would take care of you. And I broke that promise for 19 years. Not because I did not try, but because I was not strong enough or smart enough or fast enough to get through the walls that were built between us. So I did the only thing I could do. I saved the cabin. I saved the little town where I was loved for who I actually was. And I saved it for you, because I know something about you that your brothers will never understand. You know what it feels like to be forgotten. And a person who knows that will never ever turn her back on someone standing cold at her door. The cabin is not the gift, sweet girl. The purpose is keep the fire burning. I love you, Dad. I sat there on the porch for a long time. I folded the letter. I put it in my pocket right over my heart. I went inside. Odette was asleep in the leather chair. Marin was studying at the kitchen table. Sullivan was reading a book by the fire, quiet as a mouse, the way he had been for 2 weeks now, learning how to be somewhere without demanding anything from it. Emmett would be over for supper. Silas had sent word he was coming up on Friday. Delphine had promised peach cobbler. The fire was going strong. I put another log on it. I stood there for a moment watching it catch, the bark blackening, the flame reaching up, and I thought about how far I had come, from a paper cup of apple juice on the tile floor of St. Agnes to a Blue Ridge cabin full of the sound of people I loved. I thought about the girl I had been, the one who saved oranges, the one who counted every visit, the one who watched a man raise his hand to her from a doorway. I thought about her, and I said to her in my heart the thing I wish somebody had said to me a long, long time ago. You were loved the whole time, sweet girl. You just did not know it yet. Friends we are at the end of Wren's story. But I hope if you have made it all the way to this porch with me that you know something now. You are not forgotten. You are not too old. You are not too tired. You are not too far away from anything to be found. Somebody somewhere is thinking of you tonight. And if not, then let this story be the thinking of you. Because I am thinking of you. Right now. Yes, you. The one listening on your kitchen radio while the soup simmers. The one folding laundry with the phone propped against a cup of tea. The one lying in bed because you could not sleep and you needed a voice to keep you company. You are seen. You are loved. You have a home even if it does not look the way you thought it would. If this story warmed you, would you do me a kindness? Would you share it with a woman in your life? A sister, a daughter, a friend at church, somebody who might need to hear that. No matter how long love takes to reach us, it is still love when it finally does. And please, if you have not already subscribed to this channel, we share stories like this every week. Stories about family, stories about second chances, stories about people finding home in the places nobody thought to look. Leave me a comment. Tell me your favorite moment. Tell me the person you thought of while you listened. Tell me who raised you, who kept your fire burning, who left a light on for you. I read everyone. Everyone. Because I remember what it felt like once upon a time to be a girl in a cafeteria saving an orange, and I promise you, if I can help it, no woman who comes to this channel will ever feel that way again. Thank you for coming home with me tonight. Keep the fire burning. I will see you next Sunday.